Good evening. Welcome back to Armchair Sports Talk. Today's topics are preseason Power 5, who are the best quarterbacks in the game today, and how to dominate your fantasy football draft. Introducing our pro football expert tonight, Mr. Sterling Brown from Orlando, Florida. Sterling, how you doing today?
Hey, doing good. It's always good to talk sports.
Absolutely. Get a chance to catch the preseason inaugural game last week?
I did. I definitely tuned in, and it was a lot of fun to see my Falcons out there. No injuries, so that's the real win.
Absolutely. Seemed to come up really quick there. Speaking of, it is the season of preseason rankings and power rankings, and the time of hope for every fan such as myself that cheers for a certain team that may or may not be very good. So, off the top, who are preseason Power 5 in your book, Sterling?
Our preseason Power 5 isn't going to change. We've had some conversations in the past. I'm still going to keep the Chiefs number one. The offensive showdown with the Patriots in the AFC Championship is still fresh on my mind. So I still got the Chiefs number one, with the Saints a close number two. I do think that adding Jared Cook gives them some more weapons on offense, and Latavius Murray replacing Mark Ingram, I think he'll be a good fit.
Absolutely. And plus with the Saints too, getting the contract resolved with Michael Thomas, that was potentially going to be a disaster there if he were to hold out. So they got that resolved. And as long as they stay healthy with Drew Brees and Sean Payton, I agree that's going to be a fun team to watch as always. Rounding that out, who else do you have in number 3?
At number 3, I'm going to keep the Patriots there. They've earned it just with longevity. It'll be interesting to see how they move the pieces around to replace Rob Gronkowski's production. And they tend to not disappoint. I don't know if you've been paying attention to football lately. So we got to give them their due. And then the Rams with their star injured running back. But I think they got enough pieces. Cooper Kupp is going to return from injury, and we all know how prolific that offense was when they were at full health. So hopefully they have the offseason to get healthy. And then last but not least, I do have the Eagles rounding out the top 5. Let's give Carson Wentz some opportunity to earn his recent payday.
Absolutely. And going back to the Patriots, it's interesting because, they're getting a lot of publicity this offseason, and it's just impossible to write that team off until Tom Brady officially just leaves the country and does not have anything. And Bill Belichick, the same thing, because every year you hear the same talk. Oh, the Pats are done. The dynasty's over with. But year after year, they figure out a way to spread the ball around to different guys that probably were water boys on another team, such as a Rex Burkhead came from the Bengals, my team. We couldn't figure out how to use him, barely played special teams, and now he's out there in the Super Bowl with the Patriots. So just year after year, you see it. It's really amazing to watch. But something this year about the Pats, and I'm probably going to eat these words. I don't know how much I'm buying into. I just think Gronk was such a big part of that team. Even when the guy was injured, you just couldn't guard him. I think he opened up so many different avenues and different things for that offense. And then Brady, if you look at statistically, his last 3 seasons kind of trickling down a little bit. So I don't know, without that huge piece that's Gronkowski, I'm sure they'll figure it out, and I'm sure I'll probably eat those words. But this year might be that year. What do you think?
I think you're right. Gronkowski being on the field, he's either the greatest threat that you could possibly have on offense when healthy, or even when he's injured, he's going to be one of the best decoys you can have out there. So either way, it's a win-win for Tom Brady. He can do a pump fake, everybody jumps, and then he can throw it easily to Edelman on the short routes underneath, or James White on the other side underneath, or sometimes he'll sneak out a deep pass to Philip Dorsett or someone else that you've never heard of even.
Right, and I think another interesting pickup there was in the draft, N'Keal Harry going to that team. He's a guy that can really go up and spot the ball, kind of like a Gronk. So if Brady just needs to put it up there, he's a guy that can go and get it. Sony Michel, although he's a bit of an injury concern, I think they're going to have kind of a carousel of running backs, if you will. They're going to be putting different guys out there that are going to be able to run the ball. So I really think, though, that's probably what you're going to look at is, like they always do, spread the ball around. But losing that Gronk piece, I guess, is what I'm getting at, with maybe a decline in Brady's play. Might be interesting to see how that plays out. But in that division, I really don't see any of their team kind of contending with them I love your point about the Rams going back to health. I think Gurley, going back in that Super Bowl last year, I mean, just didn't look like the same player in the playoffs as he had in your previous seasons, even earlier in the year. So whether or not that knee is going to be healthy or not will really determine how well the Rams come out and play. But we'll see. I really think that that might be a team that can contend again this year. Didn't make any big offseason splashes or anything, did they?
No, not that I noticed, but Cooper Kupp really made that team go. I mean, if you look at the stats that the team produced with Cooper Kupp and then without, he truly was running like magical routes, it seemed, that made other players better. Because once he wasn't there, their flaws started to show.
Absolutely. Defense will still be stout as well. And then also your Eagles pick. I think
Yeah,
that's
I
a
do love
team that, with
stuff.
Carson Wentz, I think he's a guy that is going to continue to take steps forward. Injury is going to be a concern, but I really think Doug Peterson's a really good coach as well. Although they do have that team down in Dallas that looks like they might be a pretty good squad again this year. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys?
Oh man, the Cowboys. It's hard to figure out what's going on with the Cowboys because on paper, if they have Amari Cooper, if they have Dak Prescott, and of course if they have Ezekiel Elliott, they have one of the best three-headed attacks that you can have. I mean, truly studs at each of those positions. With Dak Prescott still maybe needing to do a little bit more, but he's giving you that consistency that you're looking for at the quarterback position right now. So with the Cowboys looking to do big things, Ezekiel Elliott's kind of forcing their hands. So you got to use whatever leverage you can because running back has one of the shortest lifespans in the NFL. So the Cowboys are probably somewhere just right underneath the Eagles, and they could replace the Eagles if we knew who we were going to get on the field on Sundays.
Absolutely. And you bring up an interesting point. According to NBC Sports, they released their power rankings this week. And although the Cowboys weren't in it, another team that's got a holdout situation going on, the Los Angeles Chargers, with their running back situation there. You're looking at two high-profile players, Melvin Gordon and Ezekiel Elliott, that could really change the outlook for these teams going in. What do you see that? How do you see these situations folding out? I mean, what's going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the similarities between Melvin Gordon and Ezekiel Elliott are going to be that it's interesting that this isn't the last year of their contract. So we're seeing players that are holding out, and if they do go the whole year not playing football, they're going to be in a very similar or identical situation the following year. So potentially, if there was a stalemate, they could be without football for 2 years, and that seems very counterproductive when the whole goal is to try to get as much money as possible while you can. So the Chargers being in here, NBC Sports, you said was the ranking here, right?
Right.
So they maybe have some inside information because without Melvin Gordon, I would not put the Chargers in my top 5. But
last I heard, he'd requested a trade officially because I guess the Chargers were offering him roughly $10 million a year, and he didn't think that was enough. So he officially went out and said, I want to trade, and that's kind of the last I've heard on it. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they shouldn't be anywhere near the top 5 without that piece in Gordon. Although it did work out for Le'Veon Bell with the Jets, I think he's definitely going to learn every cent of that contract because looking at the pieces around him in New York, if he is playing every single week, that's might be painful. Let's talk about some over and underrated teams. Give me an overrated team. We were talking about Melvin Gordon a little bit here, but maybe the Chargers could make this list?
Yes, I think the Chargers are going to be considered overrated. I mean, NBC Sports has them in their top 5. They're starting running backs demanding a trade. Phillip Rivers has never really performed as well in the playoffs as their team would have liked. Just think at the route that the Patriots had against them to go. To go to the AFC Championship game, and I just really do think that the Chargers are in a rather weak division, but outside of the Chiefs, of course, I don't really see the Broncos or the Raiders being much of a threat. So I'm not seeing it that other people are, but I'm acknowledging them as being an average to above average team.
Right. Maybe they can contend with Kansas City, and you're saying, they play Denver and they play Oakland. combined 2 times apiece. Yeah, so they may be able to hang in there in that division. But overall, yeah, I don't really see them contending with the likes of the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. How about an underrated team? Who's kind of flying under the radar for you?
And arguably the toughest division, in my opinion, you got the Green Bay Packers that are being a little bit maligned too much. They got the best quarterback in the division. I think head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. They have a new coach, so we know that Aaron Rodgers didn't get along with Mike McCarthy. So now we have LaFleur, I believe, from a coordinator at Tennessee. So if there's any kind of chemistry between the two of them, and Aaron Rodgers is able to do what Aaron Rodgers has been doing for most of his career, or almost all of his career, then I think that Green Bay is going to be able to rise back to the top of a very competitive NFC North. So I'll go put my money with Aaron Rodgers to go ahead and get back in the playoff mix.
Absolutely, and that's going to be an interesting showdown with them and Chicago. I really see them. I think they're going to have a solid defense, probably one of the best defenses in the league. And then depending on how Trubisky develops, that could be a good renewed rivalry there in the NFC North.
Let me chime in on the defense for the Bears real quick. My history and instincts kind of tell me that there's going to be a little underachieving going on there just because of the level of performance of last year. And my reference for that is going to be the Jaguars from 2 years ago when they go to the AFC Championship game. That defense was just unbelievable. And unfortunately, they just had some regression. And I know Trubisky's projecting out at a better quarterback than Blake Bortles was. But I do think that a lot of things went their way. And that defense, you had a whole year of film on them. So if they're able to slow Khalil Mack down in any way, shape, or form, I actually got my eyes on another team that might be considered a sleeper in that division.
Let me guess, the Detroit Lions.
I'll give you another guess.
Who else we got? They wear purple?
Yeah, they were purple.
Okay, the Minnesota Vikings. I thought you might go there.
Yeah, the Minnesota Vikings. I think those are your 3 contenders, and it wouldn't surprise me if all 3 did make the playoffs. But my pick to make the playoffs out of that are going to be the Green Bay Packers and Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings are a sleeper team because Kirk Cousins is about a 500 quarterback. So they didn't make the playoffs last year. That means they should make the playoffs this year. The team is hopefully going to be a little healthier. So I don't see any reason why Minnesota can't make a little bit of noise. And if you like me, like to put a little bit of money where your mouth is, then they're currently getting 25-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. So those are pretty good when you compare them.
For a team a year ago, that would have been probably much higher odds, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Like when they were losing to the Eagles in the NFC Championship game when the Eagles went on to win, everybody had them. And I think if I had to make up a number, they were probably paying out closer to 15-1 being some favorites. So you're getting 10-1 better odds at this time. And I'd say go ahead and jump on that. And hopefully they can stay healthy and fight their way through a regular season in the toughest division.
Absolutely. What other team might be a good bet from the betting standpoint? Who else do you got?
I think we like long shots. So if you like long shots, and I'm talking 25-1 as being good odds, let's talk about a team that's been to the Super Bowl within the last 5 years. The Carolina Panthers are currently 45-1. So that's my favorite sleeper team just because we like big payouts. So I like to do an imaginary dollar amount, and I'm going to try not to exceed it during the season. So if we're going to start off with $100 of imaginary money, I would probably put $1 on the Vikings and $2 on the Panthers to win the Super Bowl. So I'd like to use $3 of my imaginary budget as we track some of these wild guesses that I throw out there, wild educated guesses.
Well, I think it comes with a lot of logic, though, behind it. I mean, you look at some of the guys they brought in the offseason, plus the recovery of Cam Newton, who arguably, certainly is in the discussion for top 5, which we'll get into in a minute, quarterbacks in the league. But a lot of good stuff coming out of their camp. They had a very solid draft that I think kind of has gone under the radar. They really were able to add some talent to supplement that roster. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, if McCaffrey stays healthy, Newton stays healthy, I think they're really primed for success. Those are great odds to look at. For sure, and definitely an underrated squad there. Although it is a very difficult division in the NFC South. That's probably going to be the biggest obstacle for them.
Yeah, it's hard to acknowledge the Panthers being a contender when I'm a Falcons fan, and also we've seen what the Saints have been doing recently. Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees, very consistent. So I'd say a close second in the NFC with the NFC North. It wouldn't surprise me if either of those had three teams, but I mean, there's only so many playoff spots, and that 45-1 is just a little too attractive to pass up this early in the preseason.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and hop into round two. We're going to discuss the top quarterbacks in the game. And this was pretty interesting, but our lists, actually, we did this prior to going live on our first show. And so we just kind of blindly put down our rankings at separate times. And it seemed like we were pretty much on the same page for the most part. But however, we flip-flopped the 1 and 2. So I had Pat Mahomes number 1. With Rodgers coming in at number 2, Aaron Rodgers, and then you had it backwards. So you had Rodgers on top with Mahomes number 2. And trust me, that was pretty tough for me to do considering the amount of respect for Aaron Rodgers' game that I do have in terms of an all-time status, not even just considering right now, but where I think he'll fall in the all-time GOAT conversation, if you will. I think he's going to be up there. So Mahomes really impressed me last year. We had those two, like I said, flip-flopped on both of us, but then rounded it off with the likes of Tom Brady, the Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, and an Andrew Luck thrown in there as well. So give me a rundown, Sterling, of your top 5.
You said I got it backwards, which was a little funny. I don't know if that was a subliminal. You got it right and I got it backwards. But, yeah, Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. I think one reason why I like Mahomes is I think he had one of the best fantasy football team names last year, Rolling with Mahomes. And that was a great play on words, which is always a fun part of that. And then, of course, Aaron Rodgers, for his consistent performance, was the reason why I put him number 1. And then let's go to number 3. We had the Patriots number 3 in our rankings, so it only makes sense for we agreed to have Brady number 3 in our quarterback rankings. He got an extension, so I just, if they believe in him and they're gonna pay him extra money, and why not? He got a little bit more in the tank. You put eventually Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, so that was interesting. And I ended up going with Drew Brees, where you have him 5th. So instead of Roethlisberger, I went ahead and went with Andrew Luck, who's dealing with the calf strain. But let's hope his calf strain goes a little better than Kevin Durant's, because we learned that calves are attached to Achilles.
Yes, yeah, don't come back too soon from that one, for sure. And that was something that was interesting in a couple of the rankings that I've seen lately, jumping back to our first topic. But we were talking about the holdout conversation, how that really affects those rankings. But take Andrew Luck off the Colts. That team's nowhere near the top 5 right now. So, yeah, that's going to be huge to see how he heals up from that. Some of the rankings I saw even had them, the Colts, in the top 3, which I was a little surprised to see. But yeah. So back to the quarterbacks, though. Ben Roethlisberger, being that he plays for Pittsburgh, and I'm a Bengals fan, have been my whole life. Yeah, he's one of the most difficult players to watch play. Unique pocket awareness, and the fact that he's so big just makes clutch plays. And, he's, to me, got to be up there. It's tough to put him above Drew Brees. But I just think, like I said, maybe that this pick has a little bit bias, although it shows Roethlisberger some respect because he's beat us so many times. But, yeah, Drew Brees, that was a tough one there. And then I think Brady, my Brady bias was a little bit, how can you pick again? How can you pick against the Patriots? And I think that's why he's up there as well. A couple interesting players that you had, we had mentioned kind of in weeks past, but Andrew Luck made your list. Then we also had Cam Newton kind of flirting around with that list. Big part to that is going to be his health. What other quarterbacks out there you think by the end of the year might be in this discussion?
Yeah, good memory about Cam Newton. There are a lot of good quarterbacks in this NFL. I don't know if we're talking about these top 5 and we're leaving out, like I left out Roethlisberger. I made my little joke. He tends to be better at home than he does away, and he did have some nice pieces. But you know what? He's actually been pretty good for a long period of time, from Hines Ward to Plaxico Burress to Santonio Holmes to Antonio Brown. So I'm sure he'll figure out a way. But in addition to Cam Newton, let me think here real quick. We had Jameis Winston, who is getting another chance in Tampa, but now he's getting a chance with Bruce Arians. I do think that he's going to be able to put up some pretty gaudy numbers. And, just keep that in mind when we get to our fantasy football segment here soon, which is right around the corner. In addition to that, we don't have Carson Wentz on there. Let's say he stays healthy. We don't have Jared Goff on there. We saw what he did when Cooper Kupp was available. Jimmy Garoppolo got one of the best contracts for a quarterback in a very short period of proven started games. So we got to wait and see what he can do. Kirk Cousins got a good contract with Minnesota. He's lived up to his 500 or kind of average performance so far, but there is definitely potential there. I didn't get to mention my quarterback, Matt Ryan. I think he's an above average quarterback who can produce in familiar surroundings, and I think he's got some more weapons to play with this year.
I was waiting for you to get there. I was like, he's got to go to Matt Ryan. And they brought up Jameis Winston first.
There are a lot of good quarterbacks in today's NFL for most of these teams. So
well, you got a Phillip Rivers, you got a Russell Wilson. I mean, you're right. I mean, more than half the league is well above average at the position. Granted, I think the game is more steered towards quarterback play being exceptional now, with DBs not being able to touch a wide receiver, with not being able to touch a quarterback, with a lot of the other things that have kind of gone on. In the game, it's kind of a lot of times seems like they're playing 7-on-7, but you're right. There's still a lot of attributes that make those guys that are exceptional just unbelievable to watch, and that's why people love the NFL.
Two more honorable mentions real quick. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I forgot the Texas quarterbacks, Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. Both of them have some promise there, so I don't want to leave them out of my top half of quarterbacks, since I named almost every quarterback in the league.
Yeah, for quarterbacks, we're going to have to start doing like the top half and the bottom half for some of these rankings, maybe.
That's a good idea.
For quarterbacks. Let's move on. This is fantasy football draft season. So a lot of you listeners out there may have already had your fantasy football draft or maybe prepping for it. Well, as it turns out, we do have a fantasy football expert and betting expert, Mr. Sterling Brown. He basically finished third in the Millionaire Maker 2017 on DraftKings. This is a guy that knows his stuff, and he's here to help us figure out how to dominate your fantasy football league and, most importantly, your draft. So, Sterling, lead us off. Tell us how to dominate.
Absolutely. So this time we'll be focusing on the season-long fantasy football, and eventually we'll work our way to the daily fantasy. So for season-long fantasy football, the first rule, most important, more than anything else, know your scoring. Know every way that you can score points or lose points. There's people that don't know they're playing in a point per reception league. Every time your wide receiver catches a pass, they get a point. And if you don't know that and you're stocking up on running backs that don't catch the ball like Adrian Peterson, you're going to find yourself outside looking in, watching everybody else in the playoffs. So especially if you have any investment in there, knowing your scoring will make it more enjoyable for you.
Right. So if it's a standard league, is it 6 points for a rushing touchdown as opposed to 4 points for a passing touchdown? 6 points for a receiving touchdown, basically, that's what you're getting at.
Absolutely. You need to know that, because if you're going to have, let's say you have a Dak Prescott and he's getting you 6 rushing touchdowns for the last 3 years at least, you're going to want to know if rushing touchdowns are worth more than passing touchdowns, because that's going to factor into where Dak Prescott ranks into all of the quarterbacks that you have ranked. If you don't know how you're going to score, then you don't know how you're going to win.
Right. Okay, then don't draft your next point. Don't draft your team to have the best bench.
That's exactly right. People love having these teams that have Adrian Peterson on my bench. I got Ezekiel Elliott. I got this. You like the stars and you like all the bright lights and attention that comes with it. But let's say I draft Ezekiel Elliott, then I draft I'm able to get Devontae Freeman, then I'm able to get Latavius Murray on the Saints, and then I'm able to get Tariq Cohen on the Bears. So I have 4 running backs. If I can only start 2 or 3 running backs, I've completely neglected my wide receivers, my tight end. I don't like taking defensive early, but you know what I mean. You got to start your players that you have to start. So draft accordingly. If your bench doesn't score many points, but your starters do, you're going to be in a much better spot. Having a good bench is a good way to find yourself also looking at the other teams in the playoffs when that time comes.
Well, does it make your life a little bit easier too, though? Because everybody knows that vacillating period during the week when you can't decide to start this guy or that guy. So if you just have all good starters, man, you don't have to worry about it. I mean, it just relieves all that stress, right?
Absolutely. Fill your starters first, and then worry about having the best bench or a backup quarterback or a backup this. It's really hard to predict who's going to be starting in week 14 when the playoffs start from week 1. So
Absolutely. And how much do you put into week to week matchups according to teams and how players, play typically against certain teams? Like, for example, being in Cincinnati, I'm always looking at the vaunted Baltimore and Pittsburgh defenses. So for me, drafting a Bengals player probably isn't always the greatest idea unless it's, a handful of guys. So how much do you look at week to week matchups and specifically team to player matchups?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. So what I like to do is I like to make my decision and I try to stick with it. So one season-long decision I might make is Tom Brady doesn't have Rob Gronkowski to throw to anymore. And in just kind of looking over the rankings, my draft isn't for another 2 weeks, so I have a little bit of time. But I noticed that James White was a little further down the list than I would have expected. So James White is somebody who Tom Brady leans on. He's a safe option. He's, especially if you're getting half a point per reception or a full point per reception, he's going to get you a nice floor of about 4 or 5 catches every game. If he gets a touchdown and he gets you about 5 carries, you're looking at about 10 touches where he can accumulate some yards, some receptions, and maybe a touchdown or two. So James White would be an example of a player that I've targeted that I want to make sure I have available to get in there, because I think that Rob Gronkowski's production is going to have to go somewhere, and James White seems like a pretty safe option.
Absolutely. And how much stock do you put in? A lot of folks just frown against a quarterback being taken in the first round. Are you in that camp?
Oh, unfortunately, I am. We just listed about half the NFL that has an above-average quarterback. So if you have a lot of options on quarterbacks that can have a great week in or week out, between multiple rushing touchdowns, getting into a shootout, throwing for 500 yards sometimes, it's hard to predict which quarterback that's going to be week in or week out. So if you're able to accumulate some of these other stars at these other positions, the guys that are catching the yards associated with the 500-yard passing games or the multiple touchdowns, you're able to get your DeAndre Hopkins, your Will Fullers, your Calvin Ridleys. You're able to fill the skill positions on your team. You can only start one quarterback in most leagues. I mean, there's 2 quarterback leagues, but for most leagues, you only start one. So having Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees doesn't do you any good.
Absolutely. Very good point there. And finally, something that you've introduced me to a little bit. I knew kind of the concept, but definitely going to look into it more and potentially do a couple of them. But tell the listeners here a little bit about the benefits of doing an auction draft.
Absolutely. So I do 2 drafts now. I've scaled down significantly. I do one snake draft just because everybody else in the league complains about it. So we got to go ahead and do that to keep the masses happy. But I found another league that does an auction draft. And man, I love that league like you wouldn't believe. It's a skillful way to go about crafting your team. If you put in a lot of research to your fantasy football season, it would really stink on a snake draft, which is just going to randomize the order before an hour before it's supposed to start, and then you have to choose 7th, and you didn't know that you were going to choose 7th, and then you just have very little time to prepare, and it's random, and you work too hard for randomness. There's going to be randomness. Let's eliminate it before the season even starts. So auction drafts allow for the strategy. You can have who you want on your team, and if you've done your research and you want James White, like I alluded to earlier, you can pay an extra couple dollars to make sure he's on your roster. And if
Right. So basically the way you described it to me, the way it works is each player basically is put up for auction, and then each team has a chance to bid on their services depending on who wants them more. And then you're left with a certain amount of money, and then there you can craft your roster depending on, who you think is going to have the better season, who you can get better value for, so on and so forth. So, I'm definitely interested in it. And I think, like you said, there's a lot more strategy that goes into that than just a random snake draft.
Exactly, correct.
All right, well, Sterling, that's going to wrap up today's pro football episode, our inaugural episode. So I want to thank everybody for your time tonight. We're going to be recording every week to bring you debate and insight from the pro football world. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and we'll see you next time here on Armchair Sports Talk. For Sterling Brown, I'm Brandon Harris. Y'all have a great night.